Hello everyone, I am Ajit Pio, Verbal Instructor at Crack Verbal. This video is about text completion. We will be discussing some strategies that are specific to the text completion question type. Now the text completion questions are pretty important in the verbal reasoning section for GRE. This is because number one, text completion questions constitute about 30% of all the question types within the verbal reasoning section. And number two, a text completion question doesn't just test your ability to know or learn advanced vocabulary, but it also tests your ability to break down and comprehend complex structures. We will see these two components in text completion. But before we see these examples, let me take you through some basic rules that you need to follow while solving a text completion question. So the first thing you do, as soon as you see a text completion question, is that you read the text for gist. What I mean by that is read the entire text. Don't be bothered about the blanks themselves. Read through the blanks. Don't try to fill in the word or fill in the blank with a word as you read. This is counterproductive. We will see why that's the case. So just read the entire of the text and try to understand the surface level information that's provided in the passage. Try to figure out who the main players are, what the text is trying to say, and what opinions are being discussed. That's essentially your gist. Once you've done this, you should have a very good idea of what the easier blanks are and what the more difficult blanks are. A heads up, the easier blank is the one with the more obvious clue or keyword, and you will be able to come out with the word for that blank quite easily and with a lot of confidence, right? And that will be the easier blank. So choose your easy battles first, approach them first. Do not approach the difficult ones first, because then you end up taking more time and your accuracy also decreases. So work with the easier blank first. So what do you do when you work with them? Well, number one, you read the text around it, you read the context. You try to figure out what word can be filled in that blank, and come out with your own word. Remember, through this process, you have not looked at the answer choices. You're not even bothered about the answer choices, right? So pick the easiest blank and then come out with your word. Write it down in your scratch paper if you have to, and then evaluate your answer choices. That's gonna be a process, right? You're not going to look out for the answer choice. You're not going to try and plug in the answer choice with the blank, because many of the answer choices are very trickily constructed, and many of the wrong answer choices sound really good when put in the blank, or they look very good when put in the blank, right? So to avoid this trap, the best way to follow is this process. Read for gist. Don't fill in the blank as you read for gist. Pick out the easiest blank first and fill in your own word based on the contextual cues present in the sentence itself. Great. Now that we know what rules need to be followed, let's take a look at a sample question. What you have here is a triple blank text completion question. So there are 3 blanks, and for each blank there are 3 possible answer choices. Remember, there are no partial answers. Before you get started, a quick reminder of your process. Start by reading the text for gist. Pick the easiest blank. Once you've done this, figure out what word could fill this blank. Eliminate the answer choices that do not fit, then move on to the next blank. Take 2 minutes to solve this question. You can pause the video now. Alright, let's see what this question has to give us. The text here says that despite the aura of something that most empires project, a look at their history reminds us that they are some kind of organisms. So delicate is the ecology of power that when things start to go truly bad, empires regularly do something with unholy speed. See how we passed through the blanks and didn't really bother about what the blank itself said. We were rather concerned about what the sentence or the text overall had to say. So what did the text have to say? It spoke about empires, what kind of empires these empires are, and also about what happens to them when things go bad. Let's try to figure out what words could fill out each blank. The easiest blank here is the second blank, and this is so because the clue here is quite obvious. We know that these empires are delicate. The sentence says, so delicate is the ecology of power that, and so on. Therefore, in this case, the easiest thing to do is to recycle the clue word that I have. I'm going to just rewrite the clue and compare it with the answer choices. We know that these organisms or these empires are actually delicate or fragile. They're not powerful. Let's look at the answer choices. Macroscopic. The word macroscopic means something that is visible to the naked eye, which is not very small. That goes out. Insuperable. When something is insuperable, it cannot be won over. Something that is very powerful that cannot be defeated is insuperable, and that does not make sense either. We're looking for a word which means delicate. Fallible, on the other hand, does mean having flaws. It means delicate, so that's a probable candidate. So let's keep that. That's the answer for blank number 2. So the next easy blank is, of course, the second blank, because we realize that the first and the second blank are somewhat in a relationship with each other. Look at the sentence. It says, despite the aura of something that most empires project, meaning despite the kind of persona that they put forward, they're actually some other kind of organisms. We know that they're actually delicate organisms. So what kind of aura do you think they put forward? Well, they put forward an aura of power, of might, right? That's probably the only words that you could use. So let's go with that. Let's say power or might. Which of these words are closest to power or might? Ineptitude. Ineptitude means inability to do something, to be weak, to be non-skilled. This does not mean powerful or mighty. I'm going to get rid of that. Omnipotence. Omnipotence means to be capable of doing anything, to be all-powerful, in fact. This could work. I'm going to keep it. Go on to the last answer choice, which says animosity. Now, animosity is a word which means doing bad, or rather it means to have the quality to want to harm or to cause harm. This does not really mean having power or might, right? Some entity that is powerful and mighty could have the quality of animosity, but just having or just being hostile doesn't necessarily mean that you're powerful or mighty. Therefore, this does not fit our context. And this is a trap. Many students might select this based on the kind of words used here. So I'm going to get rid of that as well. Let's go to the last blank, right? So now we know that these empires are actually quite fragile and that they portray an image of powerfulness, but they're not. So what happens to them when things go truly bad? When things go truly bad, empires would regularly break apart, fall apart, right? Those could work because they are delicate, and when things go truly bad, delicate things generally break. So let's put that down as our word, fall apart. Let's look at the answer choices. For those of you who know what proliferate means, you will definitely know that it's the wrong answer here. For those who don't, proliferate means to spread out, to increase in number, and it's also a very positive word. It's quite contrary to the word fall apart, which means to destroy and break apart. This proliferate means to grow, become stronger, become well known, and therefore I'm going to eliminate that. When you're stuck between pullulate and unravel, you realize that pullulate is a word that you've never heard before. You kept that. You look at the word unravel and thought about the context in which the word unravel has been used. From your experience, you most probably have seen this word in cases such as, I read a mystery book and I was not able to unravel the mystery. This is probably the context in which you would have seen it being used. And from that context, what you understood was that unravel means to figure out, is to solve or to understand. And those words in this context does not make any sense, and therefore you must have eliminated unravel and picked pullulate. If you have done that, your process is good, but you were wrong. Why? Because pullulate means to proliferate in a biological sense, and unravel actually means to break down or fall apart. So what's the problem here? You knew for a fact that unravel means to figure out, to understand, and you're not wrong in that understanding. In fact, unravel does mean that as well, and it also means to fall apart. And this is called a secondary meaning. When a word has more than one meaning, and GRE or ETS, the guys who make the GRE, who set the GRE, they have the right to test you on the secondary or the tertiary meaning of a particular word. So what could happen is that you might see a word that you're very aware of, but you might be tested for its secondary meaning. And that meaning that you have been tested on, you may have no idea about. Right? So therefore the answer here is unravel and not pullulate. Pullulate means to proliferate, is to bud, is to mushroom, is to grow. And that has no relevance to the word fall apart. Unravel has a secondary meaning, which means to fall apart, and that is the right answer here. Well, what is the learning here? Well, it's not just enough to understand a word and what it means. It's also important to understand if a word has a secondary meaning, because secondary meanings are tested on the GRE. So let's take a look at another example now. Take a look at this text, make sure you read the text for gist, and ensure that you work from the easiest blank. You can pause the video now. Let's take a look at what the text has to say. The text talks about a small protest that has sort of developed into a nationwide anti-government unrest. He says this is because of the kind of tactics that the police used. It also talks about Mr. Erdogan and how his perspectives towards these protesters has changed with time. The easiest blank to work with is the third because your clue or your keyword is quite obvious. So let's see what Mr. Erdogan felt and what he feels now. It says that Mr. Erdogan has hardened his rhetoric now, which means that he's become a little more strict, a little more stringent. He's becoming less forgiving now. Therefore, how was he before? He probably was a little more forgiving. He probably wanted to please more. So let's put the word please there as the synthesized word for the third blank. Looking through the answer options, we realize that aggravate means to cause harm or make something worse. We can eliminate that. And instigate is to cause something to happen, especially used in context of unrest or something bad. So this is not what he wanted to do before. So let's get rid of that as well. Placate means to make a harsh situation better, and that makes sense in this context. It sort of means to please. Let's look at the first blank now. It says that this small protest became or developed into nationwide anti-government unrest. And how did it develop? Well, we realize that it's become more violent now and that it's becoming much more pervasive. It's become much bigger, right? So we need a word which means to expand, and to expand in a very violent way. The word broke out sort of makes sense there. Let's work with that. Going to the answer options, I realized that subsisted means to survive. It doesn't give that context of expanding violently. Let me get rid of that. The word dwindled means to go down, to decrease in intensity or number. That doesn't make sense either. I'm going to get rid of that as well. The word exploded makes perfect sense in context. It means to expand and expand violently. Let's keep that. That is the answer for blank number 1. Looking at the second blank, we realize it's talking about the kind of tactics that the police used. What kind of tactics do you think they used? Obviously, the kind of tactics used ended up in a small protest exploding into nationwide anti-government unrest. So perhaps they used very harsh tactics, perhaps they've used very bad or cruel tactics, and tactics which did not necessitate that kind of intense action. Unnecessarily harsh is a word that I can think of. So let's use those words, bad or harsh, and work from there. The word offhanded means without thought or concern, when something is done carelessly. Now, although this action could be a careless action, it may not necessitate a nationwide uprising, right? And we want a word which has that negative connotation where something harsh or something very cruel has been done. and offhanded does not bring this connotation. I'm going to get rid of that, therefore. The word butterfinger means careless or awkward. When someone is unable to do something precisely, when someone is very jittery, he's butterfingered. Butterfinger does not bring this context of cruelty or harshness. I'm going to get rid of that as well. Heavy-handed means unnecessarily cruel, unnecessarily harsh, and it fits the context perfectly. What was difficult about this text? Well, number one, the blanks were a little more elaborate, and number two, to fill in the words, you really didn't depend on vocabulary as much. What you did depend on was your ability to understand the overall gist of the text. And if you had not understood that, you may not have been able to work with the blanks. And also remember, for triple blanks or double blank text completion, getting one of the blanks right does not give you a point or a half a point. There are no partial right answers. If you get one of the answer choices wrong, if you get one of the blanks wrong, you don't get any points at all. And this is another thing that makes text completion difficult. So what are the things that we've learned today? We've learned that not only is primary meaning tested, but also secondary and tertiary meaning. So you need to equip yourself to understand and be very familiar with the kind of secondary meaning tested on the GRE. Also, nuances in meaning is tested. What does nuances in meaning mean? Well, it's when two words have very similar meaning, but then they differ by a slight subtlety. And when GRE tests you on this slight subtlety, and you're supposed to pick one of the similar meanings over the other, then what they're doing is that they're testing nuances in meaning. Second, you need to become proficient at breaking down complex structures. And third, it is very, very important to read the text completely and understand the gist of what it is. And these three skills will help you go a long way in your preparation for the text completion question type. What else can you do apart from this? Well, what we suggest is that you get in touch with us to get to know more about preparing for the GRE. One thing that you could do is to go to gre.trackverbal.com and take a look at our blogs on GRE strategies and GRE test smarts. And this will give you the kind of perspectives that will help you become a more smart test taker. And essentially that's what is important to get past the 150 or the 160 score on the GRE verbal.